4. Vicarious sacrifice. An ancient Greek religious rite gives us an insight into the widespread existence of vicarious sacrifices and penalties. The Thargelia, a festival of Apollo at Athens, included a peculiar rite in which one or two men, pharmakoi, were first fed at the public expense, then beaten with branches, and finally put to death. The connection with Apollo was not very marked. It seems, rather, to be an ancient rite which had to do with the safety of the ripening crop. Nor does it presuppose the divine anger, though doubtless more stress was laid on such a ceremony in time of famine or pestilence, when men felt that their gods were angry with them. It was, primarily, a means of removing any taint of evil which might bring danger to men or destruction to their ripening crops. Because rites of this character were out of line with the development of Greek religion from Homer onward, it is perhaps safe to regard them as survivals from a very early period. In themselves, they shed little light on the present question, except as they indicate that men feared the possible anger of their gods, and possessed means to allay the anger itself. Still, these rites of riddance must be taken into account as the source of later purificatory rites, and perhaps as the starting point of propitiatory sacrifice. Fairbanks gives us an evolutionary perspective, and hence, what he describes is a very primitive rite in his eyes, which historical development made obsolete. Such vicarious sacrifices are readily found all over the world, among Aztec and other Indians, human sacrifices, and evidence is not lacking of the prevalence and persistence thereof. These earlier forms of vicarious sacrifice have indeed often given way as cultures have developed and grown sophisticated, but this by no means gives us any ground for assuming that the fundamental motive in these rites has disappeared or abated. In dealing with the fact of motive, it is necessary to begin by calling attention to the tainted motives of fallen man. Man, as sinner and covenant breaker, approaches all things from the standpoint of his rebellion. This means that, even when he accepts his guilt, he in effect denies it. He can ascribe guilt to the environment, other people, or to God, and he can do so directly or by admitting guilt. He can still do so indirectly by insisting that the conditions of his life made sin likely or inevitable. Thus, Epicurus insisted that the world poses a moral dilemma. If God wishes to prevent evil and cannot, then God is impotent. If God could prevent evil and does not, then God is evil. Thus, as Epicurus framed the problem, God was in either case indicted and man absolved, and man had every, quote, good, end quote, reason to reject God as evil or to rule him out of the universe as impotent or dead. When man is guilty or feels guilty, he suffers. When he suffers, he resents the fact that he does, and he is determined that others should suffer also. For him, the world is out of joint because he himself is, and someone must pay for this. Vicarious suffering and sacrifice is demanded by covenant-breaking man, ancient and modern, as a means of satisfying his own outrage at being made to suffer. When Cain was angry at God, he killed his brother Abel, and Lamech, Genesis chapter 4 verses 23 and 24, made clear that whoever wrongs me in the least forfeits his life. The, quote, wrong, end quotes, could be a fancied one. Lamech made himself the judge, and others a vicarious sacrifice to his own assertion of autonomy. The motive in all non-biblical vicarious suffering and sacrifice is thus a tainted and evil one. Basic to man's life, politics, and religion is this effort to lay his own guilt upon others. Even in masochistic self-punishment, there is a strong sense of the evil and oppressive world of God and man, which, quote, requires, end quote, such suffering. The masochist is an injustice collector, to use the apt phrase of Dr. Edmund Burglar. The world and God are to him dispensers of injustice, and he is a perpetual and long-suffering victim. It is clear, thus, that vicarious suffering and sacrifice is a part of the life of fallen man. The masochist suffers, he believes, because God and man are evil, and he is their appointed and innocent victim. The sadist, on the other hand, lays his guilt on others and requires them to accept the role of a vicarious sacrifice. But a still deeper motive is also present. All men who are covenant breakers are not only tainted in their motives, but guilty men as well. Although they may consciously deny or excuse their guilt, in their heart they know that they are guilty. It is thus guilt, injustice or unrighteousness which leads them to suppress the knowledge of God. Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to 21. They are guilty in relationship to God and His law. They seek to make themselves gods and their own source of the determination of good and evil, of morality and law. Genesis chapter 3, verse 5. Denying God is basic to their denial of guilt. If there be no God, then man cannot be an offender against a myth, a non-existent thing. Basic to atheism is the flight from guilt and responsibility. However, man is God's creation, and every atom of his being witnesses to God, as does all creation. There is thus for him no escape from the witness of God. Psalm 139. At every hand he is confronted by God, God's claims on him, and his guilt before God. Man thus stands guilty in all his being, and inescapably so, as long as he is a covenant breaker. Sigmund Freud saw man as inescapably guilty, and he held that, until the problems of guilt were solved, religion and priestcraft could never be abolished. Guilty men would seek somehow to find relief through religion and some sort of religious atonement. The abolition of religion could only be properly effected by reducing guilt to a scientific problem and explaining it away as a survival of man's primitive past and of ancient drives within his unconscious being. The practical effect of Freud's solution was to create a new priestcraft to deal with the problem of guilt, psychoanalysis, with psychologists and psychiatrists also engaged in a like task. Man seeks, in his sin, a sin-bearer to bear the burdens of his guilt. Hence, vicarious sacrifice is basic to his outlook. Someone must pay, he believes, and pay heavily for the sufferings of others. The masochist seeks himself as the vicarious victim. He makes atonement for his own guilt by means of masochistic activities, but, even in so doing, he is eloquently protesting against God and life for requiring so great a price. Burglar has spoken of the habit of masochists of pleading guilty to the lesser offence. His meaning is Freudian, but his insights are often telling. Even the guilty pleas of sinful man are an indictment of God and life. The sadomasochists deny the sin, resent the guilt, and charge the real offence to God, life, and man. Thus, the doctrine of vicarious sacrifice is not evaded by denying biblical faith. It remains in a warped and evil form because it is inescapable. Whenever and wherever man denies God and His Word, he replaces it with an imitation thereof. All the categories of life are God-created and God-ordained. Man cannot escape them. In his sin, he perverts them. God's law has penalties for sin. These penalties are fixed and unchanging. The sin of man requires eternal death. Man is incapable in his sin of pleasing God or of offering an acceptable sacrifice or atonement. Man cannot make a personal atonement to God or place God in his debts by any works or acts. His creation was of grace, and his life is incapable, apart from God's grace, of ever pleasing God. Even in his faithfulness, he is still an unprofitable servant. Luke chapter 17, verse 10. Only by the vicarious sacrifice of God the Son, who takes upon himself the death penalty for the sins of his elect, can there be a remission of sin and guilt. All atonement in Scripture is by vicarious sacrifice, first set forth typically in the appointed clean animals. Leviticus chapter 1 verse 4, chapter 16 verses 20 to 22, etc., and then by Jesus Christ. Isaiah chapter 53 verses 6 and 12, John chapter 1 verse 29, 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 21, Galatians chapter 3 verse 13, Hebrews chapter 9 verse 28, 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 24. Vicarious sacrifice is inescapable. In covenant-breaking man, it means sadomasochistic activities. It means punishing various classes, races, or peoples as the guilt-bearers for the rest of society. It means a politics of guilt and hatred and a constant social revolution, as one group after another seeks to absolve man and society of guilt by punishing a chosen, quote, evil, end quote, class or group, which is made responsible and guilty for man's sins and problems. The failure of churches to understand the meaning of vicarious sacrifice and the freedom it creates has been disastrous to man and society. The presence of covenant-breaking forms of atonement is always a menace to man and society.